The distress beacon was weak, barely a whisper in the vacuum of the Darsuan drift, but it reached them. The Talari weren't a dominant species. Not by galactic standards. Technologically intermediate, politically neutral, spiritually cautious. Their world, Myri, was lush, nestled in a quiet corner of the Orion cluster. It wasn't on major trade lanes, held no military significance, and had survived for centuries by simply being unremarkable. Until the day they pulled a half-dead human from the wreckage of a smoldering escape pod. His name was Elias Mercer. His uniform bore the tattered insignia of the Vanguard, Earth's Deep Space Special Response Corps. His body was broken in 6 places. He was burned, dehydrated, bleeding internally, and barely breathing when Talari biotechnicians cracked open his pod and poured every healing serum they had into him. They didn't know who he was. They didn't care. They saw someone in pain. So they helped. When Elias finally opened his eyes, 2 Talari children were sitting beside his bed, gently singing one of their native lullabies, hoping the tones would help ease the human's pain. Elias wept. Not for his injuries, but for the first act of kindness he had witnessed in months. The war against the Drexery swarm had erupted 3 sectors over, and Elias's mission, classified desperate, had ended in betrayal. His fleet was ambushed. His ship destroyed. He was the only one who escaped. Barely. The Drexery weren't interested in prisoners. They weren't even interested in negotiation. Their aim was singular: consume, replicate, expand. Every sentient civilization was biomass to them. Their tendrils now reached dangerously close to peaceful systems like Myri. Elias had seen entire planets turned into feeding grounds. When the Talari recovered his ship logs, they realized what was coming. But they didn't turn him over. They didn't sell the data. They didn't eject him back into space to avoid involvement. They offered him sanctuary. When Elias could stand, he walked the gardens of Myri in silent awe. He visited their libraries. He met their elders. He listened as a child handed him a carved trinket shaped like Earth, a guess at what his home might look like. He asked for a comlink. They gave it to him without hesitation. He didn't send a distress signal. He sent a promise. To the Terran Defense Net. From Elias Mercer, Vanguard ID 1923A. I am alive. I owe my life to the Talari people. They took me in with no demand, no prejudice, and no treaty to bind them. If they ever need anything, anything at all, humanity will answer. We will not forget. The message was received. It was logged. And then Earth went silent. For weeks, the Talari went back to life as normal. They assumed the message was symbolic. Elias remained with them. Healing, training, helping repair some of their systems with his technical expertise. He taught the children games from Earth. He cooked for the village that had saved him. He spoke of oceans, of deserts, of Earth's storms and suns. He made them laugh. And then one morning the sky turned black. It wasn't a storm. It was a Drexery spearship. Long, chitinous, and pulsing with biolight, it eclipsed the sun over Myri's northern hemisphere. Within minutes, 2 more dropped from hyperspace, then a dozen. Drexery swarms do not negotiate. They do not warn. They arrive. They feed. The Talari stood no chance. Their planetary defense grid wasn't built for full-scale war. Their orbital cannons barely scratched the surface of the approaching dreadships. Cities began evacuating toward underground shelters. Panic surged like wildfire. But Elias Mercer didn't panic. He simply looked up and whispered, "Not yet." In orbit, the Drexery made contact. Not in speech, but in image, projected directly onto the planetary comms net. It was a feeding pit, populated by the remains of over 7 species. And then the voice came, not audible but pressed into the minds of every Talari alive. "Submit. You are harvest." The stars burned for the swarm. The skies opened. Spores began to fall. But as the first impact wave neared the ground, it was intercepted. By light. By thunder. By metal forged in Earth's orbital forges. The first human ship arrived with no warning. It dropped out of hyperspace in perfect silence, a stealth-class Ares cruiser that cut across the Drexery's flank like a blade across silk. 2 more followed. Then 10. Then a fleet. The entire 4th Terran Defense Armada, accompanied by 3 Lunar Guard destroyer battle groups and 1 experimental Ark-class dreadnought known only by its call sign, Judgment. The Drexery never saw it coming. And the Talari? They stood frozen, watching their skies, once peaceful, now a theater of fire and fury. Elias Mercer stood among them, a faint smile on his lips. "I told you," he said. "We don't forget kindness." What followed was not a battle. It was a reckoning. The Drexery spear ships attempted to deploy their planetary seeders, but human rail cannons shredded their hulls before they could descend. Anti-biomass torpedoes, developed from years of brutal war with the swarm, pierced through their regenerative cores. From orbit, the humans formed a defensive shield around Myri, interlocking fleets firing in synchronized arcs, pushing back each wave of the swarm. On the surface, Elias was no longer just a guest. He took command of Tollery's defense systems. Under his coordination, Tollery drones became surgical artillery. Their civilians were relocated in half the time. He fought beside them, not for duty, but for debt. Hours into the battle, the Drexery deployed a Leviathan, a ship so vast it blocked half the stars. Humanity responded with judgment. The Tollery watched as a Terran dreadnought, kilometers long, slammed into the Leviathan's underbelly, sacrificing its primary deck in a maneuver later classified as the Mercy Run. The Leviathan broke apart, slowly, like a god bleeding. The swarm cracked, and the humans advanced, not to conquer, but to protect the ones who had once protected one of their own. By the time the last Drexery ship burned, the skies were filled with the aurora of detonated spores and fractured void light. The battle had lasted less than a day, and it had rewritten the laws of interstellar diplomacy. The Tollery were offered full protection status by Earth. Not as vassals, not as clients, but as kin. Elias Mercer didn't go back to Earth. He remained on Myri, to rebuild, to teach, to honor the debt. Later, when asked why Earth had deployed an entire fleet in response to one man being saved, the Terran ambassador simply said, "You didn't save one man. You proved you were better than most species would ever be. That's all we needed to know." The smoke hadn't yet cleared when the galaxy began to talk. Word of the Myri defense incident spread faster than lightspeed comms should have allowed. Systems that had never heard of Earth before now whispered the name with awe. Sectors that had ignored humanity now pulled archived footage of the battle, scrutinizing every ship class, every maneuver, every brutal display of retaliation. Not because it was war, but because it was personal. A single human saved. A fleet deployed. This was not standard diplomacy. This was a declaration. On board the TDS Halberd, Admiral Juno Verrick reviewed transmission logs, her gloved fingers swiping across glowing screens. She'd led the Armada into Myri orbit with precision, bypassing Council clearance, ignoring border treaties, and violating 24 diplomatic accords. Because Elias Mercer had once served under her command. Because she remembered the boy who stayed behind on Carthus V to rescue colonists no one had ordered him to save. Because she had watched his comm record replay 37 times before speaking a single word to the fleet. "This isn't war," she had said. "This is gratitude. Fire at will." In the Galactic Council, panic surged. Humanity had long been classified as a volatile but contained force, a Terran species rising rapidly but still under observation. They weren't part of the core coalition. They weren't bound by the Great Treaty. But now they had shown something the Council feared more than unchecked growth. Loyalty. Relentless. Unapologetic. Species that prided themselves on cold calculus and detached reasoning could not comprehend the fury of a people who repaid kindness with absolute force projection. Some called Earth's act reckless. Others called it terrifying. And still, others began to ask, if one act of mercy summons an entire human fleet, what happens if you hurt one? Back on Myri, reconstruction began immediately. Elias Mercer worked beside the Tollery with hammer, plasma torch, and sheer determination. His arm was still in a reinforced exosplint, but he refused rest. The once quiet gardens were now ringed with automated turrets. The libraries had been reinforced with antimatter shielding. Tollery engineers worked side by side with human marines, exchanging tech, stories, and even music. But under the surface, something else stirred. Because not all species had watched the battle with fear. Some had watched with interest, others with envy, and a few, with a cold gleam of opportunity. The Vrox Syndicate was among them. Slave traders. Tech pirates. One of the largest non-council networks operating beyond the fringe. The Vrox had profited off the chaos of the Drexery invasions, feeding on the broken remnants of overrun worlds. They had watched the battle at Myri with hawk-like precision. They didn't care about Earth's morals. They saw something else. A trigger. If a single human could summon such wrath, what could be done if one was kidnapped? Or worse, framed? Elias noticed it first. A flicker in orbital traffic logs. A falsified dock report. And then a missing patrol drone near the southern range. He didn't alert the Tollery Defense Bureau. He called Admiral Verrick directly. They're probing the system, he said. Someone's testing how far we'll go. Varick's voice came through the encrypted line, hard and immediate. Do you think it's the swarm again? No, Elias said. The swarm doesn't study. These guys are watching, measuring, planning. That's worse. Varick didn't hesitate. Sending Black Echo. Black Echo was more myth than protocol. A ghost fleet. No transponders. No recorded logs. Built for one purpose: disappear threats before they bloom. Within 72 hours, 5 human stealth ships were in orbit under full cloak, scanning deep space traffic near Myri. They found something. A disguised frigate broadcasting as a refugee carrier, Vrox tech with a falsified humanitarian code. On board were 30 stolen species, including a young Talari girl. Elias led the boarding team. He shouldn't have. He wasn't cleared for combat ops yet. His ribs hadn't fully knitted. But he knew the smell of Vrox air recyclers. He knew what they did to prisoners. He kicked down the bulkhead door before it even finished unlocking. And the moment he saw her, small, trembling, her wrist bruised from stun restraints, he stopped thinking. He just moved. The firefight was short. The Vrox crew had numbers but not training. Elias's squad was surgical. 0 casualties. He walked out carrying the girl in his arms. She looked up at him with wide, tear-streaked eyes. Why did you come? She asked. He knelt, brushing her hair back gently. Because you're one of them. And they helped one of us. The Vrox didn't retreat. They retaliated. A week later, a Talari deep mining outpost exploded. 2 human engineers among the dead. 2 days after that, a Talari freighter vanished. Wreckage was found, crew missing. And then came the message hacked across every Talari and Terran frequency. You humans don't scare us. You're ruled by emotion. So let's test it. How many of your friends have to die before you stop pretending you're better than us? It was signed, Vrox Command Tier 7, Black Nail Pact. Admiral Varick didn't consult the council. She didn't wait for permission. She transmitted one word to the Judgment Dreadnought. Hunt. This time, the sky over Myri didn't darken. It brightened. As 10 hyperspace gates bloomed like white suns. Human ships poured out, sleek, silent, and angry. This wasn't just protection now. This was a hunt. Across 3 sectors, Terran fleets began intercepting Vrox vessels. No quarter given. No signals ignored. In every language they broadcast the same warning. You touched the ones who showed us mercy. You took our engineers. You threatened our children. We don't do ransom. We do justice. In the shadows of forgotten systems, Vrox bastions burned. In council halls, nervous ambassadors called for restraint. But humanity wasn't listening. They weren't acting as invaders. They weren't seizing territory. They were cleaning house. And across the galaxy the message spread, carried not by diplomats but by survivors. Don't help humans unless you mean it. Because if you do, they'll never, ever let anyone hurt you again. The problem wasn't that the Vrox resisted. The problem was how they resisted. They didn't attack directly. They didn't challenge fleets in open space. They bled out sympathy instead, using others. Talari convoys detonated by sleeper mines. A humanitarian orbital hospital shot down over Nearest Prime, blamed on Terran misidentification. A child's scream broadcast across 5 sectors, clipped and looped, made to sound like it came from a human prison. Disinformation, sabotage, proxy raids, designed to make humanity look like the aggressor. It was strategic chaos. And it worked. The council called emergency hearings. Diplomatic envoys demanded Terran fleets retreat, pending investigation. Talari ministers, nervous now, asked humanity to de-escalate for the sake of peace. And for the first time since the Myri incident, Earth's leadership hesitated. Just long enough for the Vrox to strike again. This time, they came for the children. 16 Talari orphans. For human exchange students. A remote education center on the moon of Irida 6. Unguarded. Peaceful. Gone. When the bodies were found, it wasn't the horror that changed everything. It was the intent. The Vrox hadn't just killed. They had recorded it. They had staged it. Broadcast the agony as entertainment. Sold the footage in shadow markets. And overlaid a final message encoded in multiple species languages. How many more until you learn? The answer was simple. None. They called her, the Pale Executioner. Rear Admiral Yen Azaki of Earth's Red Horizon subfleet. She didn't wait for orders. She didn't clear her approach with command. She simply arrived at the Irida Drift Gate with 3 dreadnoughts, 2 orbital plasma arrays, and a deep strike carrier group. Her face, usually composed, diplomatic, was like carved stone. Her message to the Vrox was short. No terms. No surrenders. You made us remember what it was like to be prey. Now you'll remember what it's like to be nothing. Operation Emberline began. No council approval. No UN sign-off. Just coordinates. And fury. The Vrox operated from dead systems, black dwarfs, radiation belts no sane navigator approached. Humanity went anyway. Through ion storms. Through gravity shears. Through warp-torn remnants of ancient battlefields. Each Vrox base was annihilated. No survivors. No broadcasts. Just silence and ash. But it wasn't enough. Not for Elias. He wasn't supposed to be in the field again. But Elias Mercer had one more mission in him. He didn't want revenge. He wanted clarity. Because the Vrox weren't just killing. They were experimenting. And something, was guiding them. Deep within a captured Vrox databank, Elias found it. A name. A planet. A schedule. And a list of species. Humanity was just the test. The real target was galactic unification through fear. The Vrox weren't acting alone. They were pawns of something older. Something cold. Something called the Agur Accord. And it had begun long before humans ever reached the stars. The final bastion was called Vraken's Maw. A planetoid riddled with spiked towers and atmosphere vents like claws. It was here the Accord hid their true archives. The data that explained everything. Why the Vrox enslaved empathic species. Why they kept attacking allies of Earth. Why they targeted kindness. Because mercy was a threat. Because loyalty couldn't be bought. Because humanity had done the one thing the Accord feared most. They changed the game. In a galaxy ruled by silence, cold deals, and power calculations, the humans had introduced something radical. Debt paid in honor. Allies defended with rage. A fleet sent not for conquest, but gratitude. It wasn't strategy. It was fire. Elias stood in the heart of Vraken's Maw. Behind him, human marines held the last corridor. Before him, rows of genetic stasis pods containing engineered soldiers. Each one designed to be immune to compassion. Elias didn't hesitate. He activated the override, purged the system, and lit it up. The Maw burned for 12 Terran hours. Across the quadrant, Vrox holdouts went dark. The Accord vanished from known space. And in their absence, the galaxy stared at Earth with something new in their eyes. Not fear. Not awe. Not even gratitude. But reckoning. Because Earth didn't just protect their own. They honored anyone who protected just one of theirs. In the weeks that followed, new treaties formed. But not on council terms. Not with grand declarations. But with quiet, unspoken respect. Human destroyers escorted Talari cargo ships. Talari sent diplomats to Earth's outer colonies not with demands, but gifts. A single act of kindness had reshaped the stars. And now everyone knew. If you help a human, humanity helps back harder. Elias Mercer didn't expect to survive Vraken's Maw. He'd accepted the price. He'd activated the core overrides. But in the moment between detonation and death, something impossible happened. A shape moved through the fire. Human? No, something. Talari. She shimmered in a personal distortion field, armor scorched, eyes focused. Minister Kalai. The same minister who had once cried when she signed the human-Talari exchange accords. She'd led a recovery team herself, ignoring the risk. Because Elias had saved her daughter during the nearest crisis. Because Earth had shown her what loyalty looked like. Now she returned it. They pulled him out minutes before the Maw collapsed. And when Elias awoke in the med bay of the TSV Valiant Horizon, orbiting above the ruins, he found a galaxy no longer watching, but following. Across 3 sectors, species once neutral to humanity now requested joint military drills. The Perellan Matriarchy pledged 10 stealth cruisers to Earth's defense fleet. Even the reclusive Zex broke centuries of silence, offering warp field tech in exchange for cultural archives. One by one, civilizations not intimidated by Earth chose to stand with them. And it all began because someone once helped one single human. But Earth didn't forget what was lost. The orphans. The children. The caretakers who stood their ground. They were honored, not as martyrs, but as the reason humanity fights differently. The Terran High Command released a new directive. No act of compassion goes unanswered. And the galaxy understood. This wasn't vengeance. This wasn't empire building. This was something far more dangerous. A species that would burn through 100 systems just to thank you for a favor. But the Accord wasn't done. They didn't believe in final losses. Only delays. Their final weapon wasn't a ship. It wasn't a virus. It was a message. An interstellar broadcast, decrypted on thousands of worlds. You think gratitude makes them strong. But what will they become when no one else deserves it? And just like that, the seed of fear was planted again. Would humanity turn? Would they become the very empire they fought? The galaxy waited. Waited for the Terran fleets to seize power. Waited for Earth to demand tribute, compliance, domination. Instead, Earth did something else. They left gifts. Medical outposts on backwater moons. Hydroponic towers for drought worlds. Warship schematics given to trusted allies, not to dominate but to defend themselves. And always, on every plaque, every data pad, every comm beacon, one phrase repeated in dozens of languages. You helped one of us, so we help all of you. Years passed. The Vrox never returned. The Accord faded into whispers. But every species remembered. Not because Earth conquered. Not because Earth punished. But because when one girl cried, when one station opened its doors to a scared, wounded Terran child, humanity answered with a fleet of vengeance, a surge of unity, and a legacy of loyalty no empire had ever dared forge. It wasn't strategy. It wasn't doctrine. It was history. The kind told in hushed tones. The kind sung in Tollery crystal halls. The kind etched into battle banners flown beside Terran ones, not below. Because the moment you helped a human, you became one of them. And if you stood against that, you didn't face a soldier. You faced all of Earth. Enjoyed that? Want more battles, more honor, and more reasons aliens fear Earth's kindness as much as its wrath? Then hit that subscribe button right now to join the fleet of The Void Narratives. New HFY stories drop regularly, each more brutal, brilliant, and beautifully human than the last. Because in this universe, you don't mess with humanity's friends. Ever.